Good day, YouTube. Welcome to the show. I am your West host, and today we're going to be talking about my favorite games of 2019. As an aside to viewers, I'm going to be using Video Game Donkey's structure for a 10 games of 2019 list. Rather than simply discuss games that came out in 2019, I'm going to discuss games that I experienced in 2019. So some of these might be a little dated by now, however, my experiences are not. With that said, let's go ahead and hop right in. Now, before I get too much hate, I'd like to clarify that Undertale is a fantastic game, made very well with a lot of love, has a fantastic story and characters. In no capacity is the fact that it's lowest on my list hatred on the game itself. Rather, this is about my experience playing. I personally had some frustrations with the multiple ending systems. Quick warning, this is a story-centric experience. This next bit will spoil any part of the game. If you don't want that, skip to the time listed on screen. Because your ending is based on the way you treat others, I didn't kill anyone except for 2 side characters in the very beginning, leveling me all the way up to level 2. However, rather than an interesting ending, I was told to play the whole thing again without killing a single person. The combat system for pacifists is infuriating from time to time, and with such little HP, the stylistic nature of the fights can still be anger-inducing. On the whole, it was a brilliantly designed and orchestrated game, but with very little payoff for the frustrations that I endured. Astral Chain blew me away within the first hour of playing. The world it designed had an interesting and engaging art style, the combat was fun and relatively fluid, and the characters were interesting. There was an ingenuity in the myriad of mechanics. And yet, despite all this, I couldn't bring myself to finish. While there are a slew of new mechanics introduced every level as the game progresses, this actually begins to stifle the game's ingenuity as time goes on. What is interesting as a concept in one level is tedious after the next 3. The story itself is remarkably repetitive, as all you do each chapter is enter the normal world, figure out and fight the disturbance, travel to the astral plane, fight whatever that disturbance was there, and then usually have a showdown in the real world again. I'm scripting this a couple months after I finished playing, to be fair. However, this is my prevailing memory after playing the game, and I think that's significant as I look back at my top 10 or now 11 list. The fact that a mainline entry for one of my favorite series is so low on this list disheartens me, to be frank. Keep in mind, this is specifically the portable version of Persona 3. I have not yet played Persona 3 or Persona 3 FES for the PlayStation 2. Because this was the portable version of Persona 3, there were some compromises made in the graphical departments due to the hardware limitations. Rather than rendering a 3D overworld for you to explore, you're given control of a cursor while your portrait stays motionless on the side, occasionally blinking in a very creepy fashion. Mechanically, the game is well put together. The combat is largely balanced, albeit difficult and sometimes unforgiving. The characters are interesting enough, though do sometimes feel a little homogeneous in their backstory. The setting is eerie and no stones are left unturned. It's one of the few entries with a female main character that you can choose, and yet it just comes across feeling so hollow. Perhaps the central theme, being dealing with death, hurt the payoff, but it does leave you wanting just a little bit more. I know this is many players' favorite entry in the franchise, but I would argue that it has much more niche appeal than the other 2 mainstays, which is saying something for an anime JRPG. All in all, I think the length of the game was fine. What it needed was to explore its characters more so than its setting and narrative setup. This game caught me by surprise, and mostly because it's so high on this list, especially compared to a Persona game. The marketing was incomprehensible, the game was inconsistent, had multiple different frame rate and other bugs, and there were multiple endings that you had to explore to complete the game, a lot of which confused the player. And yet, here we are. The storytelling method is that of a branching path, though in order to play the game properly, as I said, you experiment all of these paths, leaving no stone unturned. As you can imagine, this can mess with your memory, and the game offers clemency, providing a satisfying, if not complete, ending available to you approximately halfway through that is good enough to conceivably be a personal canon if you so choose. All that said, it is remarkably fun and interactive for a visual novel game, and despite the occasional glitches and frame rate issues toward the latter half, it is an experience I can highly recommend. I've reviewed this game already, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on this video. You can watch the previous one to get an understanding of my opinion on the game as a whole. All I can say is what usually happens for me is I put the game down for a couple months because I get frustrated with the slow leveling system and the boring and tedious combat. I pick the game up because I want the story, I enjoy the story, I put 10 to 20 hours in, and I get enraged again and have to put the game back down. I'm not sure if it's Stockholm Syndrome that I still play it, but now I have the collector's edition and that's all that matters. Also, on a side note, one of my New Year's resolutions for 2020 was to complete this game. I pray to God it happens, because I don't know if I can do another year of this, despite the fact that I genuinely love it. This is a game that I think was overlooked on its release, and I originally put it down when I first played it. However, upon picking it back up again, I can say that I thoroughly enjoyed the story. The gameplay is fluid, the story is somewhat interesting, and more importantly, the characters are fun. Your party is a joy to interact with. And the ancillary upgrade systems are individual, meaning you can reasonably invest in each member of your party rather than picking and choosing. As I was writing this, I realized that I'm speaking as if you know what this game is, so allow me to clarify. This is a real-time action RPG set in a fictional kingdom in a war with an oppressive empire where you are the chosen heir of a mysterious dragon's power. This is the most generic RPG story possible, so the twist they throw in is that it's largely set to musical themes. The other members of your party fight with weaponized instruments, and the ultimates you perform are called band performances, where the character in lead changes the song and overall effect. It's gimmicky, but it works incredibly well. This game might be a little hard to find due to its niche appeal, but I highly recommend if you can find a copy or download it from the eShop. This was my second foray into the Fire Emblem series, and undoubtedly it has proven the most difficult so far. Much like in Pokemon, this has a counterpart called Fire Emblem Fate's Birthright. The first few hours of this game introduce you to both the family that kidnapped your character at birth and the family you were originally born into. The character then chooses which to follow. However, I will clarify that this choice is made upon purchase of the game. You can later buy a DLC that has an alternate third ending for either copy of the game to follow both the families instead of choosing just one. The game features the signature Fire Emblem combat system, a turn-based grid-style combat where you control which character attacks, but not in the same vein as a normal JRPG. Rather than choosing the attack they perform, you instead choose the weapon and the characters act on their own. It's important to remember that certain weapons have advantages over others, though this can be alleviated by certain upgrades for the weapons you will find later on in the game. The only issue I really had was that many party members can be utterly useless additions to your team, and seem to just show up to pad the options, even if they do next to nothing. Also in Conquest, there's no way to train your characters outside of story missions, unless you pay for DLC. So I spent an extra $5 on the game and then got made fun of online. This is one of the biggest games of all time, and apparently the #1 best-selling fighting game of all time, and it is very well worth it. It has every single character from Smash Bros. Ever, and one of the most fun DLC rosters that I have ever seen. Originally, I was going to skip this game because I've never really played Smash before. But the fact that Joker from Persona 5 was the first DLC character brought me in. I love this franchise now, and I have put an ungodly amount of time into this game. I highly recommend it to anyone who has been on the fence. Even if fighting games aren't your thing, it's Smash. Everyone loves Smash. Easily a must-have for Switch owners. So this was my first introduction to the Fire Emblem series of games, and honestly I can say it's a series that I've slept on for far too long. Like I said earlier, the combat is a turn-based grid battle system, but that's only a fraction of the game. The majority of your time is spent interacting with your students as you explore the majestic set piece of Garrick Mach Monastery, which is much more like a full compound than a standard religious location. There's a marketplace, a gladiator-style arena, and a fishing location. The last was my favorite, but I'm a sucker for fishing in games. What can I say? The best fun in the game is developing your relationship with your students through things like tea time and giving gifts. You can occasionally get to view cutscenes of them if you help foster friendships, or dates, between all of them. It allows the characters that the developers wrote to interplay and feel richer or fuller. It's a smart way to circumvent the narrative restriction that would otherwise prevent development for each and every student, while also expanding the player's choice in the game and how it progresses. Ultimately, you choose one of 3 factions to support for one of 4 potential endings. The one I chose was the Black Lions. However, any of the 4 are going to be great options, and they are offering a 5th ending if you download the 4th wave of DLC for the game. Now, before we enter the number 1 spot, I would like to talk about my dishonorable mentions. I hate this. And now we arrive to number 1, which I would consider to be the most controversial placement of any game on this list that is clearly already full of a bunch of controversy. Pokemon Sword and Shield served as the battle cry of fans who were disappointed in the direction Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee took, as the promise of a fully 3D standard Pokemon game on a home console was made and hype began building. Unfortunately, this was short-lived. The build-up to launch was met with a notable lack of enjoyment and hype. A smaller Pokedex, lackluster animations, and a host of other compromises permeated the discourse based on this new game, and a discontent began to fester as a result. So the question becomes, why is it so high on my list? Well, for starters, I am a huge Pokemon fan. I've probably played Pokemon Emerald more than any other human being out there, over 30 separate times that I remember. I've been into competitive for years, so I can say with confidence that this is the best game on a technical scale that they have released to date, and with one of the richest post-game offerings out there. The wild area and raids give friends a reason to play the game together for hours after the game is finished, and the fact that they're trickling Gigantamax forms into the game helps that immensely. The smaller Pokedex brought some much needed revitalization into the competitive scene, so much so that I feel like playing again for the first time in over a year. I've put twice the amount into this game that I put into any of Gen 7, and I already plan to put a lot more. All in all, this is one of the best experiences I have had to date. There's a town in this game that I'm not going to spoil, but it's the most beautiful place in the games they've made. It literally took my breath away when I saw it. All in all, this is my 3rd favorite Pokemon experience, and that's very high praise from a list with so many entries. I'm genuinely glad they're adding in DLC, but that's a fight for an entirely other video. So that concludes today's list. I hope you enjoyed the video so far. Once again, I'd like to reiterate that this is my opinion on the games that I experienced in 2019, and this may differ from your own. I know we're into 2020 already, but I felt it would be remiss for me not to address what I played last year, as they were so monumental in making 2019 a truly great year to experience. If any of you have opinions on games you enjoyed last year, please feel free to share in the comments down below. I look forward to reading them. If you liked today's video and you'd like to see more, you can click right over here for other videos on my channel. And if you like what you're seeing, please consider subscribing. Have an amazing rest of your day, and like we always say here, I hope to see you around sometime.